up, everybody? Welcome back to the Bet Life podcast, sponsored by Fantasy Edge Media and bettingpredators.com. Here to talk more fantasy football, specifically Dynasty League talk. We just finished with the NFL 2026 Combine. We're just a few months away now from the NFL Draft in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm excited about that, being here in Pittsburgh myself. And joined today by a very special guest, Mr. Andres Rojas at no film underscore analysis on Twitter. He is the founder of the No Film Analysis rookie prospect model. We're here to talk all things scouting, post combine reactions, player modeling, dynasty strategy, etc., everything you need to dominate your dynasty leagues. And know, like, which rookies are we buying? Which rookies are we fading? What combine numbers should we be avoiding? What should we be buying? All that good stuff and everything else in between. Andres, really appreciate your time, man. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for inviting me. Really excited to continue to talk and share a lot of the content I've created and some of the work I put into the upcoming draft.
Absolutely, man. And, let's just tell people we had this conversation. I thought I was just going to talk to you for like 2 minutes on the phone the other day. We wound up talking for almost 2 hours, and you got a lot of interesting stuff you're doing. Your background is in data analysis. Tell me about how long have you had this rookie prospect model and what got you into it? What's the origin story here?
Yeah, so I started working on it back in 2023. So a lot of like the core basis of the model and like the formulas and calculations started back in 2023. I refined it more in 2024, and that's when I started sharing like a little bit of what I was working on. And then from there, I continue to like refine it. I started sharing more content last year in the 2025 NFL draft. It picked up some steam, but it seemed to really take off right when like the regular season ended, or when like the playoffs started back in January. So leading up to the 2026 NFL draft, this is kind of when I started gaining the most traction. But I started building this. It's like a comprehensive predictive model, and the goal is evaluating different skill position prospects. That's where it started. And so it uses different like weighted metrics that create these composite scores that ultimately lead up to providing like a prospect grade. And so that's kind of how it started and where I'm at right now.
And when it comes to the prospect model that you've built, just talk about a little bit about what goes behind the scenes. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into this. There's a lot of things you're changing year to year, month to month, even within the off season. We know, like, as redraft fantasy diehards, like we know about certain models, like JJ Zacharyson with the late round prospect model. There's other out there in the dynasty field itself. Like, what do you bring to this in terms of your unique background and someone who works full time in data analytics, and rather than just someone who creates fantasy content, get into the space?
Yeah, so I went to school for like data science, and I work as a full-time senior data analyst. And so a lot of that background and those like skills helped me help translate to creating this. And so I started like playing around with different predictive models. Like back in school, we built a couple, and then I used some of that for my job. But like my core interests and like what I'm most passionate about is football. And so I started playing around with creating a predictive model. I've heard some people talk about it. Like you mentioned, JJ Zacharyson has one. I know PFF has talked a little bit about like data centric analysis, but I really wanted to start doing like building my own content and see what I can come up with. And so I started building this out, and the idea wasn't necessarily to have it be fantasy driven, but a lot of the content I could create and a lot of what the predictive model offers can obviously translate easily to like dynasty, fantasy football, everything like that. But really, what happens is I think I looked at maybe like 50 to 60 different individual like variables that go into like and try to see what their correlation is to NFL success. So you probably know a lot of them, like yards per route run. There's like split up against the different zone coverage, man coverage, obviously like weight, combine metrics like 40 time, vertical jump, draft capital. So you have all these different variables. And then I went through and really just try to see how each one correlates to NFL success. And then I kind of split them up into different, I call them like composite grades or composite scores. And so you have like production, efficiency, you have athleticism, you have one I created called like checklist grade, which is how well does a prospect meet certain thresholds or checklists. Like you hear people talk about all the time if they check off all these boxes. Well, I wanted to really try to quantify that. And so an example is like draft capital, right? If you were to think being drafted in the first round kind of gives you like a 10 out of 10 for draft capital, second round, and then each round after that kind of goes down lower. And so all of those composite scores ultimately get produced together and produce this prospect grade. And so, and then I went through and tried to see how does changing or shifting the weight for each metric change a composite scores correlation to NFL success, and then seeing how that changes the prospect grade that correlates to NFL success. And so a lot of that was just like meticulously just like tweaking it and refining it, and a lot of the kind of boring stuff, but that's ultimately what I created.
Yeah, well, I think that's very interesting. I think that the boring stuff at this time of the year, we're sitting here Monday night, March 2nd, 2026. Anyone who's listening or will listen to this show, I think it's the opposite of the boring stuff for them. Like this is the stuff that we're all junkies here talking about Dynasty. I'm in like 30 different slow drafts on best ball right now with Underdog and DraftKings, and that's something I was very interested talking to you about the other day. It was like, hey, like I'm in round 18 of one of my slow drafts on best ball right now. Who should I take between Deion Burks, Malachi Fields, and Antonio Williams? Because that's how deep we are in the streets here, and you have these prospect scores for all these players, which is very cool, not just the top guys. But we're going to talk wide receivers here specifically today. You've gone position by position, which is fantastic. So much great content. And make sure if you're listening here and you don't know where to get Andres's content, you can go to his Twitter. You can go to his Twitter page and get his Patreon link. It's probably the easiest way here at @nofilm_analysis on Twitter. I'll make sure to retweet it out a couple times after we're done recording as well. But, you know, before we just dive into the player takes, Andres, I wanted to ask you, like, when you got into this, like given your background, I mean, you're a data analyst, not just for you're for like a Fortune 500 company. So you know what you're talking about here. you know your stuff. And like what coming into it from that perspective versus the content creator perspective that a lot of us are, myself and other analysts, like what did you learn building this out that's enabled you to have more success year after year? I know you had a lot of big hits over the last 2 seasons specifically, like big hits in terms of players to fade as well. What have you learned, and how have you iterated this model, and how is that all factoring into 2026 and continuing those things?
Yeah, no, I learned a lot. And like part of the reason I've poured so much time and effort into this was because along the way, like I've enjoyed doing all of it. Like it is a lot of work. There was like a lot of late nights just tweaking the smallest variables or things like that. But I did it because I was genuinely really interested to see what the result was. And what I learned was, I mean, it really just like opened up a whole new world to me. And so I started getting this idea of like what things actually matter, what things don't matter. Like every season, the NFL Combine comes around. It's like an event in its own rights, and it's very exciting. But one of the things that's taught me was that like a lot of like overall, a lot of testing metrics don't correlate to like NFL success or production or any way you want to measure it. There's not a lot of individual correlation from like 40 time or vertical But then you have like RAS, like the relative athleticism score, that kind of puts them all together. But even then, there isn't necessarily correlation to showing like, I don't even want to say like the most athletic players, but the players who test the best or the highest in any individual like measurement doesn't necessarily correlate, right? Because you don't see a lot of guys jumping like 46 inches in NFL. You don't see guys hitting that like 4.2 speed in like an open field. It just doesn't happen a lot. And so that's one of the things I've learned is like, okay, so what things matter and what things don't. And that's kind of an example of what doesn't matter. But also, it's one of the things I started doing is like tracking consensus board rankings and looking through people's processes because that was another thing I was really interested was how people craft like their own rankings. And you hear a lot of people where they're like, okay, they use analysis, they use data analytics and they use film and they kind of craft those together. And then there's a lot of just like really heavy film centric analysts. But it felt like there wasn't really anyone that was like willing to take on like the kind of role where it's like everything they're doing is just purely from like a data analytics lens. And so that's kind of why I started doing this. But one of the things I learned was like pretty much every season, uh, draft boards across like wherever you look, they all start kind of migrating together, right? And they start feeding off each other, and people are like copying each other's homework, which makes sense, especially if you're very like film centric. It's just like it's just impossible to watch an adequate amount of film on each prospect. We're talking about like 1,000 snaps across 300 prospects, and that's just there's just not enough time, right? And so it makes sense why people do that. But I just kind of learned I I wanted to take an approach that I didn't really see a lot in this kind of space, and so that's kind of what led me down this road. And the feedback and what people have said, it looks like a lot of people really buy into it, and so I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and it's an interesting that you're talking about looking at it from strictly the data lens, right? Where a lot of people, like I said, are content creators that do weekly articles, that do weekly rankings. Then you have the film analysis bros, right? You're like a certified ball knower, but you're not a ball watcher, right? Like that's your handle, no film underscore
Yeah,
analysis, which I really appreciate. But I think that the thing that intrigues me, like maybe like a question that I have, but also an area that I think is the right direction to go is like, okay, when you're analyzing these prospects, it seems like all the current data out there is in regards to these athletic measurables. Like you get the RAS score, you get the combine results, and that's how you do your data analysis, right? But you're looking at things from a completely different
yeah,
lens than that. And like, look, like we're looking at your wide receiver analytical guide here that I have up on the screen is 66 pages long. So you're doing tons of research and back testing to refine this model to make it more predictive, to make it more accurate. But a lot of it or most of it is pre-combine, right? Like, or I guess we
yeah.
can start getting into that. Like, what changes are you making now that the combine is over, if any, or are is like should we be fading a lot of this combine noise because that's all the hype right now before we get into any individual player takes and names.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much everything is pre-combine. The combine changes, like there are ranking changes, and there's going to be like the inevitable shifts in grades because one of the composite scores is like athletic grade, and so what goes into that is a couple different metrics. Like I'll do my own analysis and see the correlation between different metrics or different measurements for athleticism and see how that correlates. But then like the RAS score is very helpful because it already provides a lot of that work. So I try to take on like the opportunity where when I can to use other people's work and try to quantify in a way to put this because they've put a lot of work into their own stuff. And then ultimately like I've just crafted using all of those I've crafted my own athleticism grade. So it definitely results in like a changing of rankings and grades. I think most notable, if you compare my pre-ranking, pre-combine to post combine rankings, you'll see a shift between wide receivers 2 through 4. And so pre-combine, I made a post today. Pre-combine, it was like Makai Lemon, Jordan Tyson, Carnell Tate, and Omar Cooper Jr. And so those are like really the guys I see as like solidified first round talents. And so they're all, other than Makai Lemon, who I kind of have in like a slight tier above or like a half a tier above those guys. The other three, they're in the same tier of like being a first round talent. But this testing is what will result in like slight changes. And so I'll do like some background on a lot of these players to kind of input this kind of dummy athletic grade, just to kind of see what, because that's one of the requirements. And so you can either do like you give everyone like an average score and see what results in that. But a lot of times we know which players are going to test well. And it's really like not knowing which players maybe underwhelm. But with like someone like Jordan Tyson, there was a lot of buzz about him being one of the most athletic receivers in the draft. Unfortunately, he didn't test to really back that up. But you can look into what some of like maybe his high school metrics were for like a 100-meter dash, and see how that translates to 40-yard dash and things like that. And so one of the things I know is like I gave Jordan Tyson a relatively high kind of dummy grade. I think it gave it to like maybe like 8.5, 9 out of 10. And then someone like Omar Cooper, I gave him like about an average grade. But then Jordan Tyson doesn't test, and so he kind of keeps that maybe above average athletic grade. But then someone like Omar Cooper Jr. jumps up a lot because his testing is a lot better than what people were expecting. And so that's one of the shifts. Also, like Carnell Tate maybe tested, he only did a 40-yard dash. And it was a little slower than people expected. So he maybe took like a slight hit to his athletic grade. I think like his grade dropped from 8.17 to like 8.14 or 8.12. So it's not a lot, but that was enough for like Omar Cooper Jr. to leapfrog Jordan Tyson and my pre to post combine rankings.
Okay.
And then you kind of apply that to the rest of the prospects.
Okay. So we'll go through your top 5 here in a second here. Are there any other notable, and again, we're just talking wide receivers here tonight because we got a lot to go through.
Yeah.
Any other notable or extreme jumps up or down post combine for the receiver position for you?
I think so. I'm trying to remember who. Jeff Caldwell out of Cincinnati. He tested like out of this world, which I kind of had an idea he was going to test really well. Another thing there's like PFF gas. I don't know if you ever heard of that. It's the game athletic score. So it's how they track a player's athleticism in game. And he had a pretty decent grade there. And so I was kind of expecting him to test better than he was, but he was, I think, like a top 20, top 15 prospect, and he jumped up to maybe top 12. I have to confirm. But like he's someone that tested really well. And then there's a couple guys who probably tested worse than they were expecting. I think like Brennan Thompson, he ran his 40, which was, it was a fast 40. I think it might have been the fastest or second fastest, but he came in weighing at like 160 pounds, I think. And so the size speed wasn't that great. And he didn't really do any other testing. So he took like a slight hit to his athletic grade and he dropped. Malachi Fields, I think, another guy who was supposed to test like really well. Like everyone was like hyping up his athleticism, and he came out and ran like a pretty slow 40. So I'm not like someone that like like I've mentioned, put a lot of emphasis into it. But what really matters is like guys who test a lot better than they were expected, or guys who test a lot worse than they were expected. And I think Malachi Fields, after he got a lot of like Senior Bowl hype, he tested worse than a lot of people were thinking. So he took a slight hit in the rankings. But those are probably a couple of the most notable ones. And then someone like Chris Bell is coming back from injury, and he's supposed to be like an athletic freak, but wasn't able to do any testing.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your, like, I know you mentioned the top 4 change with Tyson, but other than that, like talk about just previous years going into this. You had some big red flags that kind of came out of this that really showed the accuracy and success of your model going into 2026. Let's just talk about last year specifically. Like, what were some of the biggest hits you're proud of? And then any misses and why that might have happened in terms of misses, in terms of where you had them ranked versus end of year production, maybe landing spot, etc.
Yeah. So last year, I think what the model does particularly well is just identifying these overdrafted red flag prospects. It's telling you guys like Matthew Golden last year, Adonai Mitchell the year before, Keon Coleman, Xavier Legette. It's telling you these guys don't, regardless of how well they test or regardless of how high they get drafted, their advanced metrics, their collegiate profile, their production, even whether you look at it on film or through like a data analytics lens, it just doesn't translate to NFL success, right? Like how many guys like Xavier Legette have like 800 yards through 4 seasons, and then their age 23 season, they break it off and have it like a great year and they get drafted at the end of the first round. How many of those guys even go on to become good NFL receivers? It's not a lot. And so it's done a really good job at identifying those red flag prospects. And then like always, if you're gonna improve your craft, you have to like acknowledge what kind of misses there are. And so there has been some over the years. I think most notable last year was someone like Trey Harris. I mean, he was a rookie, and he's going into his second year, so like there's still potential, but it had him graded like just slightly above someone like Ted McMillan.
Wow.
And when I look at that, so like I don't try to tweak the model. It tells me whatever's telling me, and I don't try to I don't want to introduce any kind of biases. But even then, it's like, well, I would never take Trey Harris over Ted McMillan in the real NFL draft or the dynasty rookie drafts.
Right.
But this is what my model's telling me. But how I kind of taken that information is like, okay, well, I'm not going to take Trey Harris over Ted McMillan, but he's someone that now kind of jumps up into maybe like a player I want to target at the top of the second round. And where I start fading guys like Matthew Golden, and then take a hit on someone like Trey Harris in that range. But it's not necessarily saying that Harris is going to come out and be a better receiver than McMillan. I mean, there's still potential there. But I mean, like, I'm not banking on that, obviously. But so those are a couple of examples of, and so with the model, it is really complicated. Not only like what goes into it, but just how to take in the information and how to use it. Like I'm still trying to figure out how I want to craft the results that the model gives me, and maybe how I want to do rankings and things like that. But
you mentioned a lot of like big hits that were fades, right? You mentioned Matthew Golden, Keon Coleman, Xavier Legette. And that kind of goes into the fact that right now we're still almost 2 months out from the draft, right? And that's what a lot of rankings will change based off draft capital. And you hear this like industry consensus speak of what you talked about with like big boards kind of all melding into the same consensus big board the closer we get to the actual end of April for the draft. But you're saying that's not as important, right? Like you're kind of saying like, hey, look, like pre-combine is the most important. Yes, we can make some changes. We've got some new inputs that will matter or that could matter post combine, but then that's really the most important is like getting that little bit of extra data you get from the combine, making sure that your athletic priors match up. But then draft capital is really, not to say it's the least important thing of everything that goes into this, but sounds like it's the most overrated thing in a lot of cases, because all those guys you mentioned, they were hyped up because of their draft capital. And the amount of I listen to a lot of Sharp football podcasts that, not saying the people that are talking are wrong, and I'm not an expert by any means, but you've got a different perspective to look at it, that draft capital maybe really not all is all not what it's cracked up to be. And you even mentioned the Trey Harris part. Like I know a lot of people drafting best ball right now that he's a big time sleeper for them going into next year. I mean, I remember even going into the 2025 draft, he was mocked by a few people as a possible first round pick throughout the process. So there certainly is still hope for a player like him. I wouldn't call that a miss at all. What are some of your, I know I said a lot there, but like, what is like,
Yeah, I'll
what is
follow
your,
along.
am I in the right lane of like
Yeah,
how we're prioritizing those different
no,
shifts?
you're right. And like, I mean, it's kind of funny just how cyclical the NFL season and draft season is. Like you can predict it with 100% accuracy year to year, just what's going to happen across the board, as well as like the risers and fallers, and why people are rising, why people are falling, like the post combine hype. It happens every year, and it's kind of shocking, not or shocking or funny to me, just like how people don't necessarily pick up on it. Like people will acknowledge it, but then you'll still see people continue to overvalue like athletic metrics, or they continue to overvalue maybe most recent seasons production, or even end of season production. If you remember, like last year with Matthew Golden, he had like a sharp rise in the NFL draft season because of his postseason production for Texas. But I mean, that shouldn't weigh any more than what his sophomore season was, or his freshman season was, or someone like Leggett, which I'm like still shocked at how many people bought into Leggett. When you take a guy who was like 23 years old, or I think he was drafted at 23, but going into his fifth season. So like I like to look at prospects from different stages. So like if this guy is a first round prospect, but was he a first round prospect last year or 2 seasons ago or something like that? And someone like Leggett, he played 4 seasons of college, and at that point he was like a undrafted, probably what made me not even get like an invite to the combine. I mean, he tested really well, but he was pretty much like a UDFA level talent. And then he goes out and he does have a fantastic like redshirt senior season, but like that doesn't matter. Like those 13, 14 games shouldn't matter more than his previous 30 games, where he was putting up, like he was averaging like 10 yards a game for like 35 games in his collegiate career. And that kind of happens every season. People will always overvalue like what they see most recently, whether it's the games or the season. But they continue to do it. Like I think Nicholas Singleton is a good example. Who I like. I like Nicholas Singleton as a running back prospect. I'm not out here saying that he's like a first round talent or even a second round talent, but it's kind of crazy to me that you have someone like Mike Washington, who is, I mean, he had an amazing combine, maybe the best out of everybody, but he's a redshirt senior. And kind of like with Leggett, you have 4 full seasons where he had plenty of rushing, like plenty of playing time. I think his last season, this season, he had pretty much the equal amount of rushing attempts, but he exploded this season, and everyone's putting all this emphasis into like him, and they're placing him higher than maybe someone like Nick Singleton, who, if you remember, like Nicholas Singleton, I think had maybe the second most impressive season for a running back, impressive single season of any running back prospect, which was his age 18 freshman season for Penn State. Like he was amazing. And then he kind of had a down sophomore season. And then he had another amazing junior season. And there was some potential for him to come out last year. But then he came back, him and Katron Allen, and then Penn State kind of dropped the ball this season. Everyone kind of looked bad. But now everyone's like fading him, and then they're raising Mike Washington to like a top 10, top 8, top 5 running back prospect, when it just kind of like everything's there for us. And there shouldn't be more emphasis on the most recent success than, last season or 2 seasons ago or 3 seasons ago.
Yeah. I mean, it makes perfect sense. It's like a trifecta of biases that creep in once people start actually paying attention, right? Because like you mentioned, and I wasn't really even because year to year, just in regular fantasy, like non-rookies, we always have the late season bias, right? Like, I'm guilty of it
Like
just
Buka
as
McMillan is
much as,
perfect.
yeah. And like, even just redraft purposes, like I'm tempted to be much higher on guys like Parker Washington and Michael Wilson going into next season because they had that mid to late season dominance. And not to say that those two specific cases are wrong, but it certainly can be very misleading when none of these guys have played in the NFL yet. I think a lot of people will inherently be biased towards the Indiana players because we saw them have a historic college season. We are, and maybe Cooper is the exception there, but maybe Elijah Sarratt is overrated. Maybe the running back Roman Hemby is overrated going into the season because of that in terms of like market ADPs for best ball drafts, redraft, etc. So it's like late season production can be overrated. Combine results can also be a little overrated, but then the draft capital, and you combine all of those three things together, that's how we can be so off on some of these takes, whether we're buying or selling. Exactly, just like Leggett, Keon Coleman, etc. So it's very interesting to see the full perspective of like the annual NFL calendar, like you said. And look, like a lot of this can be like you might have a great prospect and he might land in the wrong spot, right? And then it's like, okay, doesn't mean you were wrong, but maybe that player has a later breakout in the NFL because he was in the wrong landing spot for the first couple seasons or had the wrong coach or offensive coordinator for those first couple seasons. And we see that. Like, interesting one is the Broncos situation where I know you had Troy Franklin ranked a little higher, but then you talk about Sean Payton having such like a very particular bias himself towards big-bodied physical receivers, and we saw Pat Bryant absolutely peppered with targets in the last few games of the season for Denver, which makes me a little bullish on him going into 2026. So I think obviously we can't talk about landing spot right now because mock draft season is in full swing. We don't know where these players are going to end up at the end of the day. But yeah, no, it's great to hear your kind of thought process and perspective on that. I know you mentioned some of the big hits, like real big hits in terms of fades. What are some of the big hits you had in terms of the actual guys you were buying last season and the season before that you want to talk about before we get into your top 5 here?
Yeah. So my single biggest hit, unfortunately, was a player that I wasn't able to like. At the time, I didn't have any online presence. This was back in 2023 when I first started crafting the predictive model. And there was a player that really stood out to me that came in as like, he was like, depending on the different variations of the model, he was either wide receiver 2 or like wide receiver 5. Like JSN was like far and away, in my opinion, the best wide receiver from that draft. And I think he was like an elite prospect. And some people will push back and say he has like later draft capital, but like whether if Jamar Chase gets drafted 25th overall rather than like 5th overall, that doesn't change the player he is, in my opinion. And that's kind of what I thought with JSN. But this other player that was consistently coming as like wide receiver 2 to wide receiver 5 was Puka Nacua. And at the time, I had no idea who he was. Like the name even kind of sounded funny. It didn't sound like a productive wide receiver name. And I was a little hesitant to put that out there also because I was still like crafting the model. But even to today, like regardless of the changes I make, and the more I look into Puka Nacua, it just seemed like everything was there. And then everyone, like you mentioned, the trifecta of biases where, okay, so he had late draft capital. He wasn't really high on anyone's rankings. He was pretty low in consensus rankings. He had a poor athletic testing at the combine. And then nothing really stood out in his production profile unless you dove deeper and you saw that like every time he was on the field for BYU, he was doing everything. Like the player you see on film in BYU is literally the same player that he is for the Rams. And it's kind of crazy just how well he translated his production and efficiency from college to the NFL. And then you just kind of project it forward. But like he was probably one guy where I'm just kind of shocked at how many people missed him. Right. I think like Mel Kipe Jr. didn't even have him as like maybe top 40 wide receiver prospects. And no one was really talking about him. There was a bunch of people saying that he was overdrafted by the Rams, but and then you can look up, like I looked up dozens of different draft profiles and they're all kind of saying the same thing. He's like an injury player, and he has some potential maybe as like a blocker, as a late round flyer, UDFA level prospect. But then you go into his analytical profile and you go watch the film, and he's just a guy that was just always producing, and he looked good doing it. And then he looked great at the Senior Bowl, but still people kind of missed on him. So I don't necessarily want to call him a hit to my model because I don't like have anything to back it up as far as like me putting it out other than like showing that he still grades really well in my model. But beyond that, I started putting it in like 2024, 2025. And if you think about it, the last few seasons, there really hasn't really been any like big names for running backs or wide receivers that were drafted in that fifth, sixth, seventh round range. I think the one guy I would probably point to is like Tez Johnson, who I thought was a really good player. I thought he was a top 10, maybe top 12 receiver prospect last year. He ended up going in the seventh round to Tampa. But then every time he was on the field for Tampa, he was producing and making plays.
Yeah,
And I still stand by. I think he's a good receiver.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. And no, it's just I remember Puka sliding into some like super deep dynasty talk of like, hey, like late round sleeper, but it was never anything more than that, right? And it probably should have been at the end of the day, because how can a player become that dominant and no one really knew about him or cared about him before? I know there were some injury flags and things like that, but a couple real quick is like a couple things you mentioned that I think about when it comes to websites like playerprofiler.com and others, like dominator rating, breakout age. Sounds like breakout age could be something that you factor a decent bit of, like, hey, it doesn't matter what they just did this past year, but look at like when they broke out, right? Like I know that's a strong signal as well. You mentioned yards per route run versus targets per route run. What is like, do you have one stat that you think is more important than anything else, or a group of stats, or what are your thoughts on those specific metrics, or is there anything else I didn't include that you would include there?
So, so a lot with the model, it's hard to say, okay, there's this one stat, and that is like a predictive model to take to try to identify players, because the reality is that that's not how it is, and that's kind of what the purpose of the model is to kind of take all these different variables and metrics, put them together to try to quantify essentially the probability of a player's being good. But I would say the single most important stat that I've seen, and that seems like it's been picking up a little more steam this offseason, is essentially production and efficiency versus zone coverage. And so that was one of the things that always stuck out to me back when I first started crafting this. And if you look through historically at all the good players, whether they were drafted in the first round, second round, fifth round, like Puka, sixth or seventh round, if they go on to be good in the NFL, you're going to see that they were good in college, specifically against zone coverage. And the reason for that is because nowadays the zone NFL defenses are playing zone at about like a 70%, 75% rate. And so it just, I mean, that kind of makes sense. It's one of those things where like, okay, it's obvious, but for some reason, a lot of people just didn't really pick up on it. But players who do well against zone in the NFL. And not only that, like college players are also primarily playing against zone coverage. Like most of their yards is going to come against zone. Most of the snaps they go against is going to be against zone. They're not really facing like press man, but like man coverage and press, like the ability to beat man and beat press. Those are one of the things that like visually and aesthetically always looks nice. And you'll have people like breaking down a player's ability to run routes or the route running nuance, but it's always they're always doing it against man coverage, because that's one of the easiest ways to kind of identify if a player is good at running route. But when it comes to zone coverage, it's a lot more complicated, and the skill set to be a good route runner against zone is not necessarily the same against man, right? You don't necessarily need the same twitchiness or the shiftiness. You need more. It's more about like spatial awareness, which is a skill that you don't necessarily need against man, but it's very important against zone coverage. And one of the players I'll point to is like Amon Ross St. Brown. He's one of the best in the NFL, specifically at like being able to read coverage like a quarterback and find the soft spots in a zone. But then when you're scouting like college prospects, a lot of people, like, it's really hard to pick that up on when the player's doing well or not. But the one thing I always kind of point to is like the results kind of speak for themselves. And regardless of you trying to identify if this player made the right move or the right choice against zone, the process kind of the production speaks for itself. And if a player is consistently beating zone coverage, then that means that they're reading it right, and that means they have the skill set that kind of translate to the NFL. I would say one player to kind of speak to highlight this is DK Metcalf. He's a player who a lot of people pointed to as like, okay, he's a super freak athlete, but his analytical profile is not that good. He had a low yards per route run in college. He was like under 2. He's him and Brian Thomas Jr. are like the only receivers drafted in like the first 3 rounds with the yards per route run under 2.0 that went on and like had like 1,000-yard season. But specifically with Metcalf, if you broke down his effectiveness versus man and his effectiveness versus zone, he kind of struggled against man, but he actually had a over 3 yards per route run against zone in college. And I think that kind of is a great signal to where, okay, he's this athletic freak and maybe his production overall is kind of lacking. But when you dive deeper into it, you see that he was really producing his zone coverage in college.
Yeah, I think the two biggest shifts that I've seen just as a football fan who also has played fantasy and then started covering fantasy and writing about it is just the change, like you mentioned, in receivers of like the big bodied ex perimeter receivers from back in the day when there was more man coverage played. Now we see so much more zone. So you think about Des Bryant, you think about like Calvin Johnson, Andre Johnson, guys like that, and now you think about like the modern era, which like there's not a set date around that, but think about the last 5 or so years of like Cooper Kupp being one of the most dominant receivers in our game, right? And like I think about Travis Kelce too, like of guys like, and you mentioned Puka and JSN, which I think are just as good examples of like, but Cooper Kupp, it's like, how does this guy keep getting open? Right?
It just keeps happening.
It's amazing, right? And JSN is the same way. Like, oh my gosh, like he's going to get 15 plus targets a game. How does he keep getting open? And we saw with the year before, like I can speak to DK Metcalf. Like I got rid of him in Dynasty last year. Part of it was him going to Pittsburgh in a lesser situation, but the other was like watching him week in and week out, like not just the drops, but like this guy is such a limited player and how he can succeed on the field. I know Pittsburgh tried to mix him in on some screens here and there, but yeah, like he was not the most fluid, not the guy who you would expect to find those soft spots in the zone. And I think the main thing you're getting at here is like the mental side of the game, and that's what's interests me most of what you're doing here with the data is like we can measure guys' athletic traits of like how fast they are, like how well they do in the cone drill, how well they jump, etc. But like we see the production on the field, but like how do we know how instinctive this guy is of beating a zone? And then you combine that with the landing spot, then you combine that with the athletic measurables to an extent, maybe throw in some draft capital, but you're kind of reordering how we prioritize these signals of when we're evaluating these prospects. And it's very interesting for sure. I know it took a little bit longer than I wanted to get to the actual player take side, but it helps me. And like, I'm someone I've been doing rankings for the last 3 to 4 years. And I know personally that I've been tripped up by looking at these RAS scores heading into the draft of like, oh my gosh, like, this tight end, he has 99th percentile speed score, and burst score, etc. And yeah, those things can be important, but don't overinflate them either. So it's very interesting to see that. Let's apply this all and dive into the actual wide receiver rankings here, Andres. Like I know you mentioned the top 5 change. Let's go through that top 5, and then I'll start throwing some other names at you. I know you mentioned. Let's talk about Lemon first, because a lot of people before the combine, it was like it could be any of the 3. It could be Lemon, could be Tyson, it could be Tate. You've had Lemon first from the beginning. It seems like you have him first after the combine. It doesn't seem like you're going to change your mind on that. Talk about how you like Lemon as a prospect, why you have him first, and how does he make an attractive dynasty asset to you based off your model?
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of Lemon, and with him, like we've talked about before, he fits the play style and archetype of the most productive receivers in the NFL. I mean, we're always going to get pushback and saying that, okay, he might not be the fastest, especially at his size. He might be a little undersized. There were people saying that he might be like 5'9" or 5'10". He came in and he pretty much he measured in exactly what his like pre-combine measurements were, which was about 5'11", 195. And so and things like that, like people reference his wingspan or his small hands, but then like his comp throughout and the draft season was Amon-Ra St. Brown. And he came in, he pretty much measured in exactly the same size. I think Amon-Ra maybe a quarter to half an inch taller. They have very similar wingspans and hand sizes. And I mean, that I do like that comp a lot. I have his comp here to Jalen Waddle, who's actually slightly smaller. And now he doesn't, Lemon doesn't have the speed like Waddle has. But beyond that, they win in very similar ways. They've been utilized in very similar ways in college. Waddle had he was utilized a lot downfield. He was utilized a lot in the short to intermediate parts of the field. If you remember his rookie season with the Dolphins, he had like a really low A dot. They were just feeding him the ball, like try to get that speed and space. But then like his throughout his Dolphins career, he's really taken on different roles and play styles, which I think is indicative of just how good of a receiver he is, even though his production has kind of been up and down. But that's kind of what I see with Lemon, where he can win downfield, he can win in the short and intermediate parts of the game. If you want him to be like a low A dot guy that you feed, kind of maybe like 2024 Wandale Robinson with the Giants. And I'm a Giants fan, so and then you see the shift with 2025 Wandale Robinson, who's being used a lot more downfield. Lemon kind of has that ability to play all over the field, wherever you ask from him. And like I said, he's just the archetype of the players that are most productive. And so whether you look at it through a dynasty lens or fantasy or just like pure NFL draft, I think Lemon is the surefire wide receiver one this year. Like him, I think Tate has the best ball skills in the draft, but like Makai Lemon is right there. His ball skills, I think, are amazing. Like whether analytically or you watch some of the plays, he's just so good at tracking the ball and pulling it in. You've never seen his wingspan ever keep him from getting to a ball, right? He has a really low drop rate. He has really high contested catch rate. He has a really high overall catch rate. His open target rate, right? 85% of his targets were uncontested, but even that 15%, he's bringing in like 60%. And so, and then he makes guys miss in field. He could take it all the way. Like maybe he's not taking it like Devon Achane with Miami, where he's just running past guys, or Jameson Williams for the Lions. But like he's gonna find a way to get downfield. There was a game I think against Georgia State where he made like four guys miss on his way down to the end zone, and that's kind of why I have Lemon rated so high.
What is I know you like I know it's just a name that you use, and you obviously do watch football. It's not like you don't
Yeah,
watch any football or any tape, etc. You
yeah.
mentioned the film score. Like, how much are you actually watching the tape, whether it be game tape, combine tape, and what factors into that? Because I noticed that's his highest metric in terms of the career stats here on the page.
Yeah, and so with the film score, what I do is, like I said, my name's no film analysis. I don't watch film. It's tongue in cheek because I mean I love watching film, and whether it's like actual football or or draft season every year. But like I said, with the predictive model, I'm pretty much trying to remove myself from the equation because I have my own biases and I want to make my own tweaks or I see something different. But what the film score, what that's doing is it's kind of quantifying. I'm taking different quantifiable film scores. So you have PFF who has they give like their PFF grade, and that's pretty much based off whatever they're watching. But then you also have the consensus board. You have their projected range. You have NFL.com grades. You have all these different analysts that provide their own grades. And so what I'm doing with the film score is essentially taking all of that, putting it together, compiling it, and then quantifying what their film score is. And so it makes sense that his is like about like above 9 because he's projected to go top 15. He graded really well on PFF. All draft analysts are having him. If he's not wide receiver 1, then he's like top 3 at worst. He's really high on the consensus board, and so that's what the film score is doing.
Yeah, I'm noticing now looking at best ball consensus ADP, trying to see where, because I know he's been rising a decent bit recently. They're not showing rookies on this list. That's so. I'm gonna actually take that out. Yeah. So, anyways, I just on Daniel Jeremiah's top feed. He just released an update in the last week. Prior, I believe Lemon 3rd or 2nd, but now he's up to the first receiver on that list. Or actually, no, he swapped with Tate. He's got Tate 1st, Lemon 2nd at 10th overall. And then Tyson did take a considerable drop down to kind of like a separate tier. So do you view Tyson, I'm sorry, do you view Tate and Lemon in the same tier, or do you think it's tier 1 Lemon, tier 2 Tate, and that's how you break down your top 5?
I think Lemon is in his own tier.
Okay.
And you mentioned like on Daniel Jeremiah, like he's like technically wide receiver 2, and he may be like wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3, but he still has him as like a top 10 prospect. And so that matters more. Okay, well, say Tate is a number 1 overall prospect or a different receiver, and Lemon is at 10 overall. Okay, well, if you remove Tate from the equation and Lemon's technically the wide receiver 1 at 10th overall, it doesn't necessarily shift, in my opinion. He's still seen as like a top 10 prospect in the draft. As far as how like he ranks up to Carnell Tate or Jordan Tyson, for me, Lemon is in his own tier. I would kind of put it like a half a tier above, right? I think if you look at their scores, it's like Tyson, Tate, and Omar Cooper Jr. are all in like the low 8s. And then Makai Lemon is like, with the most recent score, he's like an 8.3. And so that's a big enough difference where, okay, I'm going to put Tyson, I'm going to put Lemon maybe at the bottom of the next tier, while the other guys are kind of at the top of the tier after that. So there's still like a small tier break, but I still think it's big enough where I do comfortably have Lemon as a wide receiver 1. And then when you talk about Tate, Tyson, or in my opinion, Omar Cooper Jr., they're all in the same tier for me for different reasons. But I have about the same confidence level that they're going to be good in the NFL equally. And then maybe you could talk about, okay, someone like Tate or Tyson has a higher ceiling than Omar Cooper Jr., but I still have them in about the same tier.
All right. So what makes you with this change here, right? Like the thing I'm most interested in with Daniel Jeremiah's ranking is now you have Tyson in this tier. He's got Tyson 17th, Boston 18th, Omar Cooper 19th. I'm guessing, is Boston your 5th? Because I know we talked about your top 4 so far. Or is there someone else?
I'm not.
I don't want to jump the gun.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like someone like Denzel Boston and KC Concepcion, they're always like kind of paired together. And it's interesting that my model kind of did the same thing where they're like back to back in rankings, and they're in the same tier for different reasons, for similar reasons. But they're closer to like, I think most recently I have like Denzel Boston. I think KC Concepcion may have just jumped Boston, but they're like around 8, wide receiver 8, wide receiver 7.
Okay.
Who I have rounding out the top 5 is Elijah Sarratt, who I think he's a really good prospect. I think he's a really clean prospect. I like his play style, how it's going to translate to the NFL. So I like Sarratt. I've been liking Omar Cooper Jr. More than KC Concepcion from the beginning. You could compare those two, and I think Cooper is the better yak guy. Cooper will translate better to the NFL. And you take Sarratt and compare him to Denzel Boston, who everyone's kind of been like highly ranking as this kind of big body short to intermediate chain mover. But in my opinion, I think like Elijah Sarratt is the better prospect in that regard. So that's why I have him rated higher than Boston.
Very interesting. Yeah. Right now, I'm looking at the best ball ADP on footballguys.com. Carnell Tate is the highest rookie at wide receiver 27, one spot below Jalen Waddle. So let's say we have the top 25, and then once you get past, you have Waddle at 26, Tate at 27, Adunze 28, and then Makai Lemon 29, Sutton wide receiver 30, then Jordan Tyson wide receiver 31. So you've got these three rookies that I'm guessing as of now they're going to be the top three rookies to go off the board. Obviously, sounds like you're a lot lower on Tyson than the consensus is at this moment. There's some injury flags there as well. Tate slightly over Lemon. That obviously could change. There's a lot of time we still have left. And then you have to go all the way down to Denzel Boston, wide receiver 49 in best ball ADP. After that, KC Concepcion, wide receiver 55. The next rookie after that is Sarratt, wide receiver 75. So it seems like there's a lot of late round best ball value on Sarratt. Cooper is still at wide receiver 78, but I have seen him moving up.
He's going to go up. I think he's going to be, come draft time, I think he's going to be in a range where KC Concepcion and Boston are going. Maybe he gets higher draft capital than one of them, and then kind of he elevates them. But for me, it's going to be whether Cooper goes in the third or fourth round. Those guys go in the first round. I believe in Cooper's talent.
Yeah.
Strongly.
The other guys, before we dive into them, Zachariah Branch at wide receiver 84, Jacoby Lane 86th, Brazzell 88. We've got Jeremy Bernard 92, Malachi Fields 93, Chris Bell 95, and that's the entire top 100 of wide receiver ADP right now. So anyways, let's go back to your rankings here because you talked about Lemon, Tyson, and Tate to an extent. You also talked about the late round season bias, but it doesn't sound like you have any with the Indiana guys because you're higher on both Cooper and Sarratt here.
I mean, I kind of like they kind of, if anything, I was hoping they showed up more in the postseason so that more people can jump onto him, and they kind of did more of what they've been doing throughout their careers, which is like they're making big plays in the right moment, but overall, like. Indiana's offense was super efficient, but their overall volume production wasn't that high. And I think people like Omar, Cooper Jr. and Sarratt kind of they not benefited, but they struggled because of that, right? In people's eyes, because if you look at Mendoza's overall production, it's not like like what Joe Burrow was doing back in 2020. And so that's kind of why they don't have those kind of high production numbers. But overall, they I think they accounted for like close to 60% of Indiana's overall production, passing production this past season. And so I was still impressed. But regardless of what the postseason run ended up like, I was like pushing both Sarratt and Omar Cooper Jr. as like late first round prospects for the NFL draft.
Okay. And you mentioned you originally had Tyson second and Tate third. Talk about those two guys before you move on to outside the top five.
Yeah, so they kind of flip-flopped. Tate is the wide receiver 2 in my most recent rankings. But like I said, Tate, Omar Cooper Jr. also jumped Tyson. But they're all pretty much rated the same, right? They're all within like 0.5 points of from each other in their prospect grade. And so in that range, it's really like the smallest tweak, right? Carnell Tate catching a 20-yard touchdown, or Sarratt making a big play, or not Sarratt, or Tyson making a big play. Something like that is enough to like kind of tweak it in that range because it's so small. But I don't think I'm necessarily. It's interesting seeing Tyson. His consensus dropped down to kind of where I have him. I still like Tyson a lot as a prospect. It was just when he was being touted as like a top 5 guy in the whole draft, I was like, I don't think he's that level of prospect. I think he's similar to like Garrett Wilson, who I think Garrett Wilson is a good player. He went high, but when we're talking relative to guys like Jamar Chase or JSN or Malik Neighbors or CD Lamb. Those are pretty much all the guys that are like top 5 in my whole predictive model. They were like rated in the high 9s if you want to compare them to the grades here. I don't think someone like Garrett Wilson was on that level, and I don't think Jordan Tyson is on that level. That's not to say I don't think they're good. I just don't think they're like those level of prospects.
Do you think Tate is on that level?
No, probably not either. Right?
Okay.
Neither is Omar Cooper Jr. The reason I've been like really pushing the Cooper narrative is because when I first started talking about him, he was like in the 4th round on consensus boards, and now he's like kind of catching up. Like even there's a lot of people who actually rank him higher than me, surprisingly.
Okay.
But then compare that to Tyson, who's being touted as like a top 5 guy. I just and same with Tate. I don't think Tate is that level of prospect either, right? I think I have Tate's his high end comp as George Pickens. I think he can hit that level. But like, is George Pickens worth a top 5 pick? Maybe now because we know what he did. But it's like I think they're going to be good.
Yeah.
But I just don't think they're worth that kind of draft capital.
Yeah, for sure. I'm very interested because I have your updated rankings here because we're looking at the pre-combine guide that you have here, which we'll go off of just for the visuals. But it's interesting to see who you have after because we talked about both Indiana guys. Anything with Sarratt that jumps off the page to you? Because it seems like I wouldn't be surprised to see Cooper pop up in like some round 1 mocks, given the steam he's been getting.
Yeah, I can see that.
We still have the Indiana, perfection buzz going on. I think we'll have that all the way through the draft. Those guys are going to be glorified to a certain extent. But Cooper seems to be getting a lot more buzz than his teammate Sarratt.
Yeah.
But you still have both top 5. So look, after we talked the other day, I had already been taking Cooper here and there. But then I realized in the next 24 hours after our talk the other night, I was like, I was on the clock in 20 different DraftKings slow drafts. And I was between rounds 15 and 19 and almost all of them. I think I took Cooper 10 straight times. I'm like, I'm just going to take him every single time. Yeah. But I haven't taken Sarratt a decent bit. And I feel like that might be maybe a mistake in round 19, round 20.
At that point, honestly, it would be, okay, so if you're talking about 10 drafts, right, and you're looking at probabilities and they're both available, then I'm like, okay, I would take Cooper 6 out of 10 drafts or maybe 7 out of 10 drafts, especially if he gets higher draft capital or depending on the landing spot. But I still believe in Sarratt enough where okay, I'm willing to take him even maybe ahead of Cooper in certain drafts like best ball, how that plays a part. But with Sarratt, I'm a big Sarratt fan. It's interesting because with him, he was higher. He hasn't really moved on the consensus board. He's been ranked in the same place consistently, but then he was pretty comfortably ahead of Omar Cooper Jr. back in during Indiana's playoff run, back in early draft season. But then Cooper really leapfrogged him. But with Sarratt, I think he's a great prospect. I think he's a really clean prospect. Some of my concerns is that he is an older prospect. He's going to be 23 as a rookie. And so you may not have that in his style of play. You may not have that high ceiling as someone like Carnell Tate or Jordan Tyson. But I'm so comfortably confident that he's going to be a good player. If you think someone like maybe Michael Pittman or T. Higgins, those are good receivers. And that's kind of where I see Sarratt. I think kind of being playfully, one of my high-end comps for Sarratt was Anquan Bolden, who I do see a lot of Bolden in Sarratt's game, which is this big body contested catch guy, kind of bullies the defender. I think Sarratt is probably one of the best receivers in the draft as far as having a high floor and being the kind of go-to target for your quarterback. And I think him or Cooper would pair perfectly with Mendoza in Vegas.
Yeah, very interesting for sure. I've got your updated rankings here that you sent me before the show. So I'm going to keep them oscillate between tabs of the actual guide for the player breakdowns real quick. So this is going to be a huge buzz guy, I think, as we get closer, is Bryce Lance. And I've already seen some chatter. I'm deep into the Dynasty junkie streets, mind you, but Interesting. Bryce Lance, brother of Trey Lance, the quarterback. We're talking about the receiver here. Plays at a small school again, North Dakota State. You've got him ahead of another semi-buzzy guy, KC Concepcion, and you've got them both ahead of Denzel Boston, who Denzel Boston seems to be a consensus top 5 for a lot of guys. We'll round out the top 10 here. Talk about Lance and Concepcion. Why do you have Lance 6? And are these guys all in a kind of similar tier as any of the guys we just talked about previously?
Yeah, so I think this is probably a perfect example where what the model is showing, I'm probably gonna differ and deviate from. Like, I'm not gonna be out here proclaiming that I think teams should take Lance ahead of KC Concepcion or ahead of Boston because he has his own concerns, right? He's gonna be a 24-year-old rookie. And we look back historically, I mean, there's not a lot of players that are coming in as 24-year-olds at the wide receiver position and putting up good numbers. But he's an example where, like, if you look at his checklist score, which is pretty low, and what that's showing is like, okay, he's an older prospect. He plays at a young, like a low-level school, so his level of competition is lower. So that goes into checklist score. He's going to have maybe 4th, 5th round draft capital. That goes into his checklist score. And so his checklist score is pretty low, but regardless of that, some of his efficiency metrics and production are so good that it still elevates him to a higher prospect than guys like KC Concepcion and Boston, who have their own red flags, but then they don't have the production or efficiency to kind of back up or like kind of elevate them enough. So with Lance, I think he's probably the best deep threat in the NFL draft. Okay. Him or Carnell Tate, but with Lance, his deep ball production was just kind of out of this world. Like, you see, he had a super high ADOT. His touchdown per route run, his first down per route run are really high. You look at his QBR, so his quarterback rating when targeted, that is like almost that's higher than a perfect QBR by NFL standards, but college does it a little differently. And he has the ball skills to kind of translate all of that because in my opinion, if you're going to be a good deep threat in the NFL, Lance has the speed as he's shown at the combine, but really what I think matters the most is like deep ball separation, downfield separation, and ball skills. I think matter the most because regardless, like every yard that a target goes higher and higher, the more chances that target is going to be contested. And so when you're having these 20 plus yard targets downfield, I want a guy that has good enough ball skills to kind of convert those targets. And I think Lance has that.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple of the stats that you're tracking here, and it's a very user friendly visual guide that's on Andres's analytical guide on his prospect model here with the prospect grade at the top. You've got the play style for Bryce Lance, high end deep threat, the archetype, prototypical Z receiver, prospect projection, third round talent, and we'll see where the draft capital actually ends up matching up with that. But then you mentioned some of the other things, right? You have the film score, you have the checklist score, which are very valuable. The QBR when targeted, I noticed his yards per route run is very high. So maybe the knock on him could be like, hey, look, the QBR when targeted and the yards per route run, how good would those have been if he was playing for a power conference school at the end of the day, right? And that's going to be the question until we see him actually get on the field and try to prove himself. You have the player comp as well. High-end comp Christian Watson, who had kind of a breakout year himself this past year, finally got through those hamstring injuries. And then the low end, which is Nick Nash, who we were talking about drafting in best ball pre-draft last year. And a lot of people don't know who Nick Nash is because I don't think he ever got in the field as a rookie. So
he went undrafted. I think he's with Atlanta.
Yeah, I think the last I saw was that as well. So very interesting there. What about KC Concepcion? Because it seemed like he was like a borderline top 3 or 4 or 5 guy, but maybe he's slipping a little bit. I know you have the player comp Wan'Dale Robinson on the high end. The low end is Mecole Hardman. I can definitely see the similarities between those two players in terms of like what they look like when you're watching them. But obviously Wan'Dale's been a lot more productive and consistent the last seasons than Mecole Hardman has been. What are your thoughts here on KC Concepcion just overall? Because when I look at your updated rank, rankings, you still have him ahead of Denzel Boston, kind of like that top 7, top 8 before we get into a bunch of other guys.
Yeah, I think the old one had them. I think they flip flopped. Boston was slightly ahead of Concepcion, and now, like I said, they're pretty much in the same range, right? They're like 719 to 7.16, and they're pretty much identical. And it's funny when you compare their profiles that they have different play styles and different archetypes. One's a bigger body guy, and the other guy's like smaller and slender and frame, but they have a lot of the same concerns. With Concepcion, like I think he's one of the most dynamic playmakers at the receiver position in the draft. And what he does really well is beating man coverage, and that's why you will see a lot of guys kind of talk about his ability to run routes. And if you look at the film, he has some of the most beautiful routes of any receiver in the draft. They're very crisp, they're very sharp. So they look really good aesthetically, and you'll see him consistently beat man coverage in college. But I think what's harder to judge is he'll go a long time when he's facing zone coverage, not getting the ball or not producing or not doing a lot with the ball when he's facing zone coverage, and that kind of shows up in his analytical profile. You see the discrepancy in his yards per route run versus zone, and then compare that to his yards per route run versus man. And so I think I made a post a couple weeks ago. Him and Boston both fall in this bucket where if you look historically at receivers drafted in the first 2 rounds since 2019, and those who have a yards per route run above 2, and against man, and then yards per route run versus zone below 2. It's like N'Keal Harry, maybe Jalen Rager. There's it's pretty much a 0% hit rate, right? And so both Concepcion and Boston fall into that bucket of guys who look great against man. They have the draft capital to back it up, but then like their underlying metrics, like the performance against zone, were really underwhelming. I have it here. It's Terrence Marshall Jr., N'Keal Harry, Denzel Mims, and KJ Hamler. And so those are the guys that had a 2.0 yards per route run versus man in college, and then under 2.0 yards per route run against zone that were drafted in the first 2 rounds. And so that's just kind of highlighting that these are the guys that maybe struggle against zone, which is what's primarily being played in the NFL.
Right. And you have the 20% efficiency percentile in terms of his zone yards per route run here. So definitely a red flag for sure. And those guys you mentioned, I remember at some point, all of them had considerable hype. I think maybe there's a little bit of hope left for Marvin Mims, but it doesn't seem like he's going to be a full-time player in Sean Payton's system.
It was Denzel Mims.
Oh, Denzel. Okay. Denzel Mims.
I might have said Marvin Mims.
Oh, no, you might be right. I totally forgot about Denzel Mims, but I do remember Denzel Mims for sure. He certainly got a lot of hype on his own. Yeah. So that's interesting on Concepcion. Well, so it kind of seems to me like, the two Indiana guys and Bryce Lance, like they're the 3 kind of maybe unconventional guys going into your top 8 so far. And when you go past Denzel Boston on this list, these are the only 8 that are above the 7-point threshold of the prospect score, right? So I guess for the sake of this discussion, we can be like, here's a tier break, right, between Denzel Boston and below this line. It looks like you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7 or 8 guys in the next tier that are 6.5 to 7. We don't have to go one by one, but it's interesting that you have Chris Brazzell here from Tennessee. I don't know if it's Brazzell or Brazzell, but the Tennessee bias has certainly been a real thing in terms of translating college production to NFL production. And I've heard some people say, hey, like Tennessee has modernized their offense a little bit the last couple of years, so maybe it's not as big of a concern for a guy like Chris Brazzell. What are your thoughts on Brazzell and that kind of that bias, whether it's right or wrong, going into this draft specifically?
Yeah. So I posted today, actually. I gave like my 4 tiers, and there is like technically a tier break based off what the model will assign their grade, where Brazzell is getting a 4th round talent grade, and like Denzel Boston is getting a 3rd round talent. But like for me, I kind of lumped Brazzell actually into that group. And what I posted today was who I think or have like third round grades. The three receivers are Chris Brazzell, Denzel Boston, and KC Concepcion. I would even put, despite Lance's higher prospect grade, I probably put him closer to like a fourth round talent. And this is just me kind of like tweaking based off my own opinion. I would kind of flip flop Brazo and Bryce Lance. Like I would take Brazo over Lance in a real NFL draft. With him, I think he's a fun player. You're right. There has been some like Tennessee bias or like receivers who have good production in college coming from Tennessee that don't translate, whether you're talking about someone like Hyatt, who, again, as a Giants fan, I'm very familiar with, and then Dante
Right.
Thornton Jr., who I actually had him graded really highly last year. I think I had him as a top 10 wide receiver prospect. I think he was worthy of like a third round grade. He didn't really do a lot as a rookie. So there may be something with like Tennessee receivers just not translating well to the NFL. And so you could apply that to Brazo Hill here. But with him, I think what's different is despite having like a really high ADOT like Hyatt and Donnie Thornton Jr., his play style is different than those guys. I think his route running is more crisp. I think he looks better in that short to intermediate, particularly in that intermediate space, like the 10 to 20-yard range. I think his route running looks really good on film. You see that his yards per route run versus zone is higher than his yards per route run versus man. It's not great. I think it's in the like 50th percentile range. But with him, I still think with his potential that he's worth taking a shot on in the third rounds, maybe both in the NFL draft and rookie drafts. But with him, Brazo, I like him a lot, but he's probably just not someone I would take in the top two or even top 50 in the top 50 picks.
Yeah, I know that these things are changing, but just to review what you have on your Twitter, you had Lemon. Obviously, we talked about him kind of being a tier atop by himself with the comps of Amon-Ra St. Brown at the high end level. Tier 2, which is your 55% range
Yeah.
hit rate confidence. You've got Tate, Tyson, and Cooper. You've got Sarratt in his own tier in tier 3. And then the guys we just talked about here, tier 4, Brazzell, Boston, Concepcion. Lance, actually, you have in tier 5. Is that just a matter of a draft capital thing, or do you need to update Lance and move him
There's
higher
a
there?
lot. Like it's just like with the predictive model, I'm still wanting to do a lot more research to know, okay, should I start docking these guys that go from low level competition more?
Yeah.
And when I first looked at it, it's like it would dock some guys a little too much. Someone like Rashee Rice, right, who actually graded really well in my predictive model. But if I'm gonna dock someone like Bryce Lance for playing at North Dakota State, then I would have to do the same with Rashee Rice, who went to SMU and then had second round draft capital and has been one of the most productive receivers in the NFL on like a per route basis for fantasy. And so that's kind of like kind of two sides of the coin there. But with Lance, I would still probably put him closer to that fourth round level just because with the school, but also he's an older prospect, and so that's why I would probably flip flop them, and that's why I did it. And so I made that post today, kind of showing my tiers, and then I made like a follow up to kind of go into how I would put like a confidence level on these guys. And so with like Boston, Brazil, and Concepcion, I would give them maybe like I think like a 25% hit rate, right? So like these guys may pan out. I'd be surprised if like two of the three end up being like consistently good receivers. And then below that, like Bryce Lance and Ted Hurst, Jeremy
Okay.
Bernard, those are guys where like one of these guys may hit, which is about that 10% hit rate.
Okay. I mean, I'm interested in now we'll talk about the kind of deep dive guys like Chris Bell. I've seen pop up early in the discussions for best ball drafts, for dynasty drafts, etc. Because the only thing really holding him back from what I've heard is the injury history or the fact that he tore his ACL last season, but maybe he's got enough time to come back and be fully healthy for camp. I've seen Jacoby Lane pop up a decent bit as like a big possession style, possible red zone threat. I've heard other names, like I've heard Jeremy Bernard, haven't really heard much. Ted Hurst, I've been hearing a little bit about recently. I know a small school player there as well. Is there anyone on this list you want to highlight? Jeremy Bernard, Spell, Jacoby Lane, Ted Hurst, or anyone that like should be on this list or that almost made this tier here for tier 5?
Yeah, I can talk about all these guys like in depth, and there's one guy I think I really want to highlight, and this is a guy that has pretty much been getting zero buzz. Like if you go on to the consensus board, what's that called? The NFL mock draft database.com.
Yep.
They have a pretty good a consensus board, and someone that doesn't show up on there is Cameron Dorner out of North Texas. I think I just looked up today. Yeah, he still doesn't show up, which is pretty shocking to me.
Okay.
Just considering that now he came from a very small school, and then he went to a semi-small school in North Texas. Prior to that, I have to remember where he was playing, but he played 1 year with North Texas, and I thought he looked really good. And he's just another guy that I'm surprised is beginning zero buzz just based off what he's shown at North Texas. Like he helped North Texas become like a top 25 AP ranked team for the first time in a very long time. And he has some really good plays and some really high leverage moments. There's guys like who's a quarterback? Drew Messmaker, who might go like first overall next year. There's some Wyatt Young. They both transferred to I gotta look it up. But those are the two guys from North Texas that have been getting the most like most eyes looked at them. But with Cameron Dorner, he looked really good last year playing for them. Like if you look at his prospect score here, he did great against man and zone coverage. He had a really high first down rate per route run. He had a great QBR when targeted. He caught 80% of his targets. He was consistently getting converting those contested targets into catches. Like I said, he had some really big plays and some really pivotal moments for North Texas. And so he's just someone that I'm just shocked. He didn't get an NFL Combine invite. And who he reminds me the most of, not necessarily play style, but just like this gut feeling I have. And someone that my predictive model identified was Jalen Coker, who went undrafted. And he was a guy where, regardless of whether he went drafted or not, I had this confidence level that if he got the opportunity, he was going to produce, and he has done that for Carolina. And I feel similar with Cam Dorner, where he may not get the opportunity. He may never play a snap in the NFL. But if he's given the opportunity and he does play, I think he's going to show up, and I think he could be good. So that's one guy I do want to highlight. But he's going to be someone that pretty much no one has heard of.
Interesting. I went to USF, and what I will say is I did watch a little bit of North Texas being in the American Conference, and they were a pretty formidable team. USF got the most of them, but they really peaked after that game. And it was their offense specifically that really took off and got them towards the end of the season. So it's interesting right there. It's not necessarily like the smallest school, so it's like, American, I think is kind of in between there. Like, I think if you had to add another power conference into the mix, it would be the American over anybody else. Did he not play a lot of games? Because I see all the production rates are super low.
If you go down, he played one season at North Texas. He played 3 years total. And I gotta look up where else he played before North Texas. And so that's why, the stats I was able to pull were only for North Texas. I was able to look up a Shepherd University athletics, and they don't have any available data that I need to input into the model. You can see yards, catches, receptions, but looking at like routes or anything like that, or especially zone man splits, they didn't have any of that. But his Shepherd.
You said Shepherd. Where is that? D2 or JUCO or something? There's no way that's D1.
Shepherd University. but his stats there were pretty good from what I saw. And then I looked at like how was it relative to the rest of the team, and it was pretty good. So like he had in 2024 he had 700 yards and 5 touchdowns, but I think in total they had like under 3,000 passing yards. And so I can't really speak to how it's pretty much like as low level competition as you can get when trying to talk about these wide receiver prospects. But he did play 1 year at North Texas, and he did look good in my opinion.
Okay, very interesting. I like to hear that. I'm definitely gonna have to cue him in one of the around 20 picks of one of these best ball drafts I've going on
Yeah,
right
he's
now.
literally like if in terms of dynasty, is like if you even have the space, maybe add him. Like I'll be adding him to a couple of my like rebuild teams just to see if anything comes from it. Kind of like what I did with Jalen Coker a couple years ago.
And I'm just scrolling down here. You've got the top 50 on this list, and I will say the one guy that pops up that I've heard the most of is in your top 25. So we'll kind of cap it there. And on Daniel Jeremiah's latest top 50, I noticed a couple of guys fell off, but here are the guys still hovering down, even though they've dropped a little bit. Tell me your thoughts on any of these guys standing out, whether it's someone you want to buy or fade. We got Zachariah Branch at 50th overall. We've got Deion Burks at 49th overall. And then Antonio Williams, surprising there, at 46th. And Malachi Fields at 44. So what are your thoughts on any of those receivers there?
Yeah. So I don't know if it's my end, but I'm still looking at Cameron Dorner's profile. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's on here. Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't sure if you pulled the rankings up to show that. Okay, there you go.
I got it now. Yeah.
Okay. So Malachi Fields.
So Fields, Burks, Antonio Williams, and Zachariah Branch.
So one of the guys I probably want to talk. I don't like talking bad about players, especially like I try to keep it just specifically analytical. That's another reason I try to go through an analytical lens, because I don't like talking bad about guys. But the one guy that I'm just shocked has been getting like any kind of buzz is Deion Burks.
Okay.
He has one of the worst analytical profiles like I've ever seen, especially for a top 100.
Right. He's not even on your top 50, right?
He's like, I think he's in the 40 range.
Okay.
Were you talking about Deion Burks or were you talking about somebody
Deion
else?
Burks. Oh, okay. He's 45th on your list.
Okay. I thought I heard Burks, and that's kind of what prompted me to.
He is in Daniel Jeremiah's top 50 overall prospects.
I need to hear what they're like. I've heard a lot of people talk about it, and one of the things that they'll talk about his athleticism, especially being like kind of a smaller guy, like his ability for like his explosive metrics.
Okay.
They're really impressive.
I'm actually going to, this to be a fun exercise. I'm going to read you Jeremiah's latest write-up, okay? Burks is an undersized wideout with excellent suddenness and polish as a route runner, varies his tempo, attacks leverage, taps into an extra gear when the ball is in the air, stays grounded through the catch, contributes to his effectiveness in collecting yak, had a few concentration drops, but also a few exceptional plucks thrown out well outside his frame, valuable on jet sweeps because of his speed and lower body strength, helps him break tackles. Overall, Burks isn't there yet, but I see Deion Branch type potential after studying his game.
Yeah, I'm really wanting to know what they're looking at, because
he's watching too. Dale Jeremiah is watching too much film, man.
Well, when you read that write up, right, and I'm like, you have this idea of this kind of player, but in my head, it's just like this Madden style write up that they just randomly generated for a player, where like that could be applied to like 50 different players.
Sure.
But beyond that, when we look at it, right, he's going to be an older prospect. He's pretty much what Xavier Legette was without his explosive season, his final year. Like this is what Legette was doing before that, where he's getting plenty of playing time. He's running a bunch of routes, but he's not really doing anything with them. Like, if he were to get drafted, I think of all drafted players all the way up to round 7 in the last like 10 years, he's gonna have like the worst yards per route run versus zone. This is like 100th percentile. worse among drafted receivers. There's a couple undrafted players that are like lower than that, but then you look at his man stats, and he's not producing against man. People talk about his yak ability, but like, so you have this undersized guy who has like a really low A dots, and you see occasionally he's able to make people miss, but his yak per route, his yak per reception ranks in like the 21st percentile amongst receivers since 2019. He has an awful QBR when targeted, right? It's 79.5, which is
Okay.
one of the lowest for any receiver prospect in the last like 10 years. That's like an atrociously bad one. And he's undersized guy, and he's not like someone that can go up and get it in contested situations. He's converting 37% of his contested targets. And so for me, it's like how much do I talk about a 7th round receiver prospect that didn't really do anything in college? But then with Deion Burks, he's being hyped up as like a top 100 guy. It feels like the burden should be on the people that haven't rated that highly. Like, what in his profile do you see that can actually translate to production in the NFL? Because I'm not seeing anything.
I think they're just going to look at the combine numbers and 98th percentile burst score, 98th percentile 40-yard dash, and that's it. And that's what we talked about with the bias going in, is like there has to be context around these numbers, like with your RAS score, with your workout metrics from the combine. And it's great to know that perspective for sure. The other guys that in Jeremiah's top 50, are any of them worth late round flyers in your opinion? I've heard a couple other rookie analysts talk about Antonio Williams. He was a guy that, like, I think he still has the lowest ADP out of all these guys. I mentioned Malachi Fields from Notre Dame, Antonio Williams, is from Clemson. And then also I've heard some decent buzz on Zachariah Branch from Georgia as well. Who's your favorite or least favorite really out of those three names?
It might be Antonio Williams. Like, Zachariah Branch is another guy where he's being like, so I'm data centric, right? But then for like people who watch film, again, what are we seeing that can translate to the NFL? Like, even if you look at his highlights and look at him at his best of his best, talking about Zachariah Branch, we're talking about like screenplays half of the time, or if they're not screenplays, then they're within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. And there's a couple of plays where he's able to make guys miss, and he's able to use his explosiveness and his speed to break away. But again, it's nothing that translates to the NFL. With Antonio Williams, I do like him more than that. I think I have his comp as like Jaden Reed, where he is like this short to intermediate like slot receiver, and he could be pretty reliable in that role. But with Williams, he is also slightly undersized, and he doesn't have the ability to make guys miss. Like, we see his 15% avoided tackle rate. That's really low, especially for someone with an average depth of target that's in like the 10th percentile range for receiver prospects. His yak per reception is really low. So we have this guy who primarily does all of his work in that short to intermediate range, but then doesn't necessarily have the skill set to consistently make guys miss. But beyond that, I still like him as like that shifty route runner who could be like a man beater in the NFL. So he has a role, but it's probably not the kind of one that will translate to a lot of sustained fantasy production.
Yeah, so you've got Antonio Williams on your post combine list, 19th. You've got Malachi Fields 21st, Zachariah Branch 23rd. So all kind of in that range there for sure. Jacoby Lane, we kind of glossed over him. You have him 10th overall. He's been one of those names, but I think he's grouped in these guys we've been talking about that you have a lot lower. By the way, the comp you had for Antonio Williams, if you don't see it here on the screen, if you're listening, is Josh Downs, right?
I think I was going between Josh Downs and Jaden Reed as that.
Yeah. Makes sense. I think Jeremiah's takeaway was Williams is an ideal slot receiver with the upside to be a high volume pass catcher at the next level, right? And like you said, like, I can't remember whose tweet it was. I retweeted. I thought it was funny that they basically blatantly caught Daniel Jeremiah using AI for some of these write-ups. because like you said, like a lot of this can literally just be copy pasted and just, hey, ChatGPT, I've got this one prospect profile write up. Can you give me 39 different versions of it, and I'm just going to put it under these different receivers, right? Because so much of it is the same. I think personally, like where I place the value on Daniel Jeremiah is if you're trying to bet the NFL draft. Like, he legitimately has connections and NFL insider. Like, that's where you want to listen. But I think the value in looking at a top 50 like this is he might be hearing things about how NFL teams perceive these players, which could obviously cause them to have much higher draft capital than the consensus big board has right now. So it's, give or take with what type of value Daniel Jeremiah can provide, whether you're playing Dynasty, whether you're betting the NFL draft, whether you're playing best ball, etc. Jacoby Lane, let's talk about him and then we'll wrap things up here.
Yeah. So Lane, he's another guy. Well, I was kind of surprised at how highly he graded in my model. He's in that 10, 11 range. And there are a couple of things where I understand, like he is one of the younger prospects in the draft, and he's the kind of guy that you can mold to your liking depending on where he goes. And he has he did also make some really big plays for USC, and he had some amazing catches. That's kind of why I comped him to Alec Pierce, where he's as I think that's kind of role I think he will thrive in the NFL, is just this downfield target that has the ability to make like these insane catches. And he has a really high touchdown per route run rate, which I think contributed to him being kind of graded higher in this. But he does have an interesting profile. Like, he had like 500 yards and 12 touchdowns in 2024, which is, and then the last season, those 12 touchdowns dipped to like 4 touchdowns, and his usage did go up, but he has an interesting profile. I'm still unsure how I necessarily feel about him. He's probably a guy that I would, like the model says, like 4th round range is where I'm willing to take the shot on him. But he just doesn't necessarily have anything that I'm like putting money on that is going to translate well to the NFL. But yeah.
And this is what happens when you get past like the top, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys, right? Like, he's your wide receiver 10. It doesn't mean that you think he's going to be some next generational prospect. I mean, and you mentioned earlier about being able to beat zone coverage overall. This isn't the type of player that Jacoby Lane is. It doesn't mean he's not going to be a good NFL player, right? Because your comp to him is Alex Pierce, who plays on the outside. Low-end player comp, Jermaine Burton. I know all about him as a Cincinnati Bengals here, as you see on my shirt. So we both can relate already that we're fans of 2 absolutely terrible NFL franchises, even though you've got a couple Super Bowls at least to your name. So I'll give you that as a Giants fan there. All right. So yeah, like, I mean, a couple just random questions here. We've talked about a lot of guys already. Any thoughts? I've seen some hype of Ted Hurst name coming up, Jeremy Bernard, Chris Bell. Anything on those guys?
Yeah, I like Hurst. So what I do like is about this draft is there are a lot of play styles and different archetypes and body types. Hurst is someone that we're talking about, like the downfield target, deep threat kind of role. He's one of my favorites. He's probably like a top 5 receiver in that archetype alone. Like, you have guys like Carnell Tate that like ranks atop that list. Someone like Bryce Lance is ranking up there. Hurst is someone else that I like in that role. He also has insane athletic measurables. He had a really good season with Georgia State. He's a fun player to watch if you do put on his tape. He's making some great catches down the field, and despite having like I think his ADOT was at over 15? Yeah, 15.02. He's consistently making guys miss in the secondary that I find impressive. He reminded me a little bit of George Pickens. He was one of the comps, but I think that was a little bit too high. I think I settled for Terry McLaurin, which I'm not like, I don't think he's necessarily going to reach that. I was just kind of looking for players that with that archetype. But Ted Hurst is someone that I think he's an interesting prospect that you can take in the 4th round to fill a specific need. I'm thinking maybe like Darius Slayton for the Giants, he can fill that kind of role. Or let's say the Colts let Alec Pierce walk, then you can bring in Ted Hurst to kind of fill in that role.
Okay, and you mentioned you also did like Chris Bell a decent bit too before we started talking.
Chris Bell, I think I've rated him
Yeah.
pretty low too.
Yeah.
Relative.
You got him 16th. You've got Hurst 14, Jeremy Bernard 15, Chris Bell 16.
Yeah, Chris Bell is someone else that so everyone thinks I've seen a lot of people talk about him being a first round talent that is lower on the consensus boards because of his injury. Now, with my model, it doesn't account for injury at all. And so it has a 4th round grade on him. But this isn't because he tore his ACL and maybe coming back slower in his rookie season. I don't necessarily care. Like if you're a good receiver, then I'm not factoring that in at all. Like if you're going to miss half the season, like again, bringing it back to Giants, Odell Beckham missed his first 4 games with the Giants and everyone's freaking out because of a hamstring injury. Okay, well, I mean, that didn't matter in the long run for that season. He had other concerns, obviously, but with Bell, I don't factor in his injury history at all. For him, he's just someone that, again, I don't necessarily see the kind of ceiling that people have been talking about. He's supposed to be uber athletic, but he's primarily being used in that short to intermediate range. He's a big body receiver. He's over 220 pounds. And so aesthetically, when you watch him, he's a fun player, and he's kind of like doing the AJ Brown Debo style after the catch, where he's just like bullying guys and just just exerting his force on a lot of guys. But when we're talking about translating to NFL production, I don't see like that's not going to happen in the NFL unless you're an AJ Brown, unless you're Debo Samuel. You have to be able to do the other things consistently right, like finding the open spots in zone coverage and being the safety blanket for your quarterback, especially for his archetype where he's going to thrive in that short to intermediate range. And I don't necessarily see that with Chris Bell. But again, that's if you're looking at like a top 100 guy, right? When we're talking about in the 4th, 5th round, then I can see like he's willing to take a shot on in that range. But again, I don't think he has the first round talent that a lot of people have been talking about with him.
Okay. And as we wrap, anything else that you want to add in just in terms of your process with modeling, with guys you're still looking out for, with changes you're expected to make? Obviously, for those listening, you see the film, you see the no film _ analysis. That's Andres' Twitter handle. It has his link in his bio to his Patreon, where you can get the full copy of his draft guide for every single position, not just wide receivers. And we'll talk about some more positions here in future episodes. Anything else? Did we miss anything, or what do you want to wrap this on, man?
I mean, there's a lot. Like I'm really excited because I have been working on this stuff for a long time, and now like I've done everything myself, including the graphics, building the model, the calculations, the weighing, putting the prospect grades together. And so now it's kind of reaching a point where I'm able to start building content and start sharing it with people, which I'm really excited for. And I appreciate everybody that has kind of taken to it and like the content and have shown me love. Like I appreciate it more than I can even express. Like I've never thought I'd be able to be here. I'm not a content creator type. I'm still trying to figure out, how to speak in these kind of formats and mediums, but I have a lot of really cool content coming away. I'm going to have the post-combine full wide receiver guide coming soon, post-combine tight end guide. I was trying to share my tight end guide. I had one ready mostly, but then I kind of fell behind, and it was like right when the tight end testing was going on. So I kind of decided to hold off on that. But the post-combine tight end guide is coming. Post-combine running back guide is coming. And then there's going to be like a second phase to these guys where I'm going to add an additional page that goes more in depth into kind of, it breaks out their yardage, depth, and breadth. Like you're looking at how often are they being targeted on the left side versus right side versus center, and that zero and in the different ranges of the field. So there's a lot of more content coming that I'm really excited to share. And again, I appreciate this so much for inviting me on and allowing me to talk about all of this.
No, it's my pleasure, man. I'm grateful for you for making the time as well. And you talked about you not being a content creator, but this is great content. You hopping on and pouring your thoughts out here, looking at the Patreon where you can get individual rankings, whether it's tight end, whether it's running back, whether it's receiver. Are you doing quarterback in the near future, or is it you keeping it skill position player?
I put a lot of time. Like I've done pretty much everything for wide receivers, like going in and looking at all the predictive metrics. I've done that for almost every position. I've gone the most in depth for receivers, running backs, tight ends, primarily because there is that fantasy focus. For quarterbacks, I was just really struggling finding a formula and finding a predictive model that was producing the results that I wanted to share with people. Like I could put together similar guides like this without all of that stuff, and it kind of shows you their analytical breakdown. But with quarterbacks, I'm still trying to find to see if there is any kind of predictive metrics that translate to NFL. But they're kind of all over the place. Like if you look at Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson, they have completely different production profiles in college and analytical profiles, and what translated for one of them didn't necessarily translate for the others. And then you have someone like Justin Fields, who was super athletic, had amazing stats, had amazing passing stats, and then didn't amount to anything. So with quarterbacks, I don't have anything right now, but in the near future, I do eventually want to be able to provide this for every position, including defense. So
that's awesome, man. And like you said, like don't look at Andreas's work here as just a dynasty model, as just like a rookie fantasy model. This is based off the prospects themselves. That obviously this can be applied to fantasy, to dynasty leagues, but also if you're a scout, and I know you've talked to various scouts and agents over the years that are interested in the work you're doing. So this can be applied in many different areas. I'm super excited to see this continue to grow. I think it's fantastic content. I think the content that you do after this, honestly, is the easy part, because you've got like the real foundation built.
Yeah.
Of you can create so much content off the analysis you're doing. And that's the type of content, as a creator myself, like that's the type of content that I like to consume personally, whether it's for me just playing in my own fantasy leagues, or for me to learn how to produce better content, is looking at analytical work that someone like yourself is doing. So really appreciate you coming on. Again, check out Andres's work on Twitter at @nofilm_analysis. You can catch his Patreon link there. I'll tweet out a couple links to this live stream in the future for those listening on audio, etc. I know we went a little over an hour and 45 minutes. I feel like we could have a 5-hour conversation if we would have went through every position. So I'm glad we did the wide receiver first. I'll put you on the spot here to close it out, Andres. Like, who's going to be the biggest overachiever relative to ADP and draft capital, and give me the biggest underachiever, one sleeper and one bust at the wide receiver position, man?
I've been hesitant to put my name to it, but I may just do it and put it out there. But I'm probably going to put my name to KC Concepcion and Denzel Boston. I think they're going to underachieve a lot.
Okay.
Depending how you consider it, like if you consider someone like Keon Coleman an underachiever, or Matthew Golden, like they still have their fans, but I just don't think their analytical profiles are going to translate to NFL. So
okay,
I gave 2 there. And then as far as an overachiever, I think Elijah Sarratt. I think he's being widely undervalued right now. And I think he may not come in and be like a Jamar Chase level prospect or Drake London or Puka, but I think he's going to be a good receiver, and he's going to put up a lot of good seasons for whatever team drafts him.
And you'd put Cooper in that same bucket, but
Cooper
might catch
up.
I
feel
to
like
him.
People stole my thunder. I had so many planned posts for Omar Cooper Jr. where I was going to be touting him as like this such great prospect that everyone's missing out on, but like there's been so many people that have like overtaken me on the Omar Cooper hype, putting him in their top 20 overall prospects. So now I feel like I can't even like hype him up. But I mean, I love Omar Cooper Jr. He's one of my favorite prospects.
No, that's fair enough. Elijah Sarratt, I got to start adding him to my best ball portfolio for sure here. All right, Andres, really appreciate the time, and look forward to talking to you again, man.
Thanks so much, Chris.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening.